to pretend that there's nothing to see here, or pretend that what all the work that we've been doing over the last several years doesn't matter anymore, and now we, like a pop-up shop, we close up and move on to the next thing. How do you think that impacts the women that were in those programs, or people of color, or LGBTQ, or you know people with disabilities? How do you think all of that impacts them in their day-to-day work, right? And trust has taken a hit. I think sometimes we don't want to admit that trust isn't there, right? Because it's like a bad word, right? Oh, no, no, everybody trusts everyone. But in order for us to solve any of some of the problems that we're experiencing in the workplace today, we have to have a baseline for you to understand and close this expectation gap.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sundays with Vernā. We are in for a treat. We get a chance to talk with Minda Harts, and we are going to talk about a favorite subject of mine, which is the secrets behind leading with compassion, and in particular, this idea of trust. And this is a conversation with the author of the new book, Talk to Me Nice. She's also a workplace consultant and keynote speaker, transforming how trust fuels workplace success. She's helped organizations like Nike and Google and Zoom build trust driven cultures that thrive. She's the author of The Memo. A lot of people know about that book and are excited about the movie that is coming out. I heard you all did well at Cannes, so I want to hear about that. The last time you were here, you were talking about your book, Right Within, and now we're going to talk about Talk to Me Nice. Welcome, Minda.
Thank you, Vernā. I appreciate that.
So, I wanted to ask you, trust is a big area that you are focused on now. And I know there's a difference of opinion about whether one has to trust first to build trust, or whether you have to prove yourself trustworthy. Do you have an opinion about what comes first?
Yeah, well, that's a great. It's the chicken or the egg, right? Vernā, kind of situation. But I once heard somebody say that they always start with a full cup of trust in the workplace until people start taking away from that, and that's a mantra that I also lean into. Even if I had a bad experience with a previous manager, if I have a new manager, I don't like to take that baggage with me, right? I start with a full cup of trust, and I think we all want that grace provided to us in situations. So I think we have to start there if we truly want a space where we can be healthy inside the workplace.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do worry sometimes that people are bringing so much baggage to every relationship, no matter what, that it's really hard often for leaders. Having been a leader inside, I have a lot more compassion for leaders than I did when I was just advising them from the outside. And often it's hard for them to get a break because unfortunately, some leaders before them didn't do well. And so people are often bringing that to them, and it's hard for them to overcome that. But first of all, let's just, I'm a lawyer, recovering attorney, so I like my definitions. How would you define trust for folks?
So that's a great question. And I'm going to Mindanize this just a bit. But for me, trust in the workplace, or trust in any relationship, because let's be honest, we expect trust in our romantic relationships, in our platonic relationship. That's like the ground floor, right? We expect
Yeah.
that. So why wouldn't we expect that in a place that we're going to work 90,000 hours of our lives at? And so for me, trust is defined by action and verb. It's the demonstration. And so I think once we understand that trust isn't something that we can be cavalier about, it's something that, regardless of the tide and the climate, trust is always going to be and should be the main character in the room. And so for me, really, the definition is that it's an action and a verb.
I love that. And I also love that you have made a verb out of your own name. Nice. I love that. Fantastic. Okay, so you have this seven, dynamics or trust language frameworks. Can you explain a little bit of that? We want people to buy the book, so you don't have to tell us everything, but
Oh,
tell
yeah.
us about your framework.
I made a mistake. I meant to say with trust, Vernay, it's a noun and a verb. That
Yes.
is where we really have to maximize that. But the seven trust languages is really important to me because I as you know, you get a lot of people asking you for advice about things. And when people come to me, they'll be like, oh, I don't trust my manager or I don't trust my colleague. And what I started to realize is what people were saying was, yes, it might not be that they trust them, but what was underneath what they were really saying? What was the part that they weren't saying out loud? And it always kind of fell within one of these seven buckets. I don't trust
Okay.
my manager because they're not being transparent enough, or
Yes.
I don't feel secure enough, or they're not demonstrating something to me, right? So the trust languages are transparency, security, demonstration, feedback, acknowledgement, sensitivity, and follow through. And when we activate one of those, I feel, or maybe many, maybe some of people will find that they are multilingual, right? They want they need a few different languages. But what people were saying was, man, if my manager or my colleague could be a little more transparent, then I could trust
Yeah.
a little bit more. And so for me, it's like, okay, trust is just it's just some word that you're throwing out there, but what if you were acknowledged just a little bit more for your work? Would that provide a little more trust for you? Would that make you stick around a little bit longer? And so I'm thinking, okay, we're just not talking each other's language. So if we could articulate that, I can't just go to you, Renee, and say I don't trust you anymore at work.
Right.
I'm not going to get the best out of that. But if I can articulate a empowering sentence and create dialogue with you to say, when you said X, Y, and Z last week, it really made me feel this way. I know that you may not have intended any harm, but this would be helpful for me. People can be like, oh, okay, now that I know that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is so brilliant because what we're always doing to build relationship is communication, right? And trying to find the words that would open the communication versus close it. And, when you say you don't trust somebody, it's like this, right? A lot of people feel like it's an insult or an assault that they can't come back from. But if you say, I need more feedback. When I don't get feedback, it makes me feel insecure, or you just said great, but you didn't say anything about what I could do or improve. Then I'm wondering if I can trust the great that you said, right? And so, wow, that's really wonderful to give people some of those tools. And I also know as a leader that you want like transparency, for example, right? You want to be transparent, but you also want people to trust that there's certain things that you really cannot tell them. So how do you manage that as a leader, for example?
That's a great, great question. And so I know I grew up in a house where my parents were always like, don't tell everybody our business, right? So we were like, button up, don't tell anybody anything. And so it is hard to be like transparent because transparency is that clarity and that honesty, right? And nobody wants to be looked at otherwise. But also, transparency is saying, hey, I know that there was a layoff that took place. I know we're having a reorg. I don't have all the answers right now, but I understand how that might feel to you. So I'm leaving an open door. So as you have questions, feel free. And if I can answer them, here they are. That's transparency too, but pretending that there's nothing to see here, that's not transparency or telling everybody.
Exactly, exactly. Oh my goodness. If leaders only realize that you can say, there's stuff I can say and there's stuff I can't say. Here's what I can say. Here's what you could, and I love the come back, like if you have other questions, come back. I may be able to answer them. That just keeping the door open really, I think, creates a sense of trust as well. So what do you think are like maybe the best ways to build trust, and then how is it lost? I mean, your seven trust languages, I think, is part of like how you build trust. But say it's a brand new relationship and it seems like the leader that you're talking to, you feel like there's not a lot of trust there. Whose job is it, first of all, to build the trust, and how is it done?
Yeah, I love that question because it's It's also we all have been in a situation, Vernay, where we walk into the office or we walk into the Zoom room and trust was there at 9 a.m. and it's gone by 9:17, right? Not because anybody said, "How can I destroy trust with Minda today?" but because our actions sometimes it's either going to enhance trust or erode trust. And oftentimes, I don't think people realize that how the impact is on the words that we say, the decisions that we make, and how that lands on other people. And I think what can happen is trust can be an arc, right? And it can be on an emotional roller coaster with it all day. But the idea is let's talk to each other. Just like Gary Chapman had the 5 love languages. We may not speak everyone's love language, but if I know that demonstration is important to you, Renee, if I know that follow through is what's going to keep you doing your best work, then I want to ask that question. So in my one-on-one with you, I'm going to say, what does trust look like to you? Right. So now I have an understanding and a baseline for having the conversation. But I think sometimes we don't want to admit that trust isn't there, right? Because it's like a bad word, right? Oh, no, no, everybody trusts everyone. But in order for us to solve any of some of the problems that we're experiencing in the workplace today, we have to have a baseline for you to understand and close this expectation gap because you're not going around the workplace with a crystal ball saying, oh, I got 100 people I'm managing, I'm not going to know everything. So let me ask you what you need from me because if I can speak one of your languages at least, we're going to have a better relationship, right? And so I feel
Yes.
like it's trust is a two-way street. As an employee, I have the onus and the self-advocacy to say, "Hey, this is what works for me. Wanted to let you know, let's partner in this way." And as a leader, you read that and say, "Hey, okay, I have all these people on my team. One size doesn't fit all, but if I know that to get the best work out of Minda, I need to be a little more transparent. I can do that, right?" And that's something that we can all work toward. And I feel like that's feasible. We may not be able to do all the things, but if we can start to do something, then that creates a more trusting environment.
So, the thing that I love about what you're saying is this idea of a two-way street and a partnership. I think when there is a differential in the power dynamic, people often don't think if you're on the low end of the power dynamic, often unless you have a sense of agency, it's kind of hard for you to imagine like let's partner, right? But what you're doing is you really are building a relationship. And people, first of all, are impressed by your agency, usually,
Hmm.
just sort of saying, let's partner. And two, if you're offering them information that's going to allow them to be better and cut down the friction, they're going to appreciate it and you're going to appreciate it too. But often I think we're both like way too, on both sides, way too closed.
Yeah.
And what about like in personal relationships and romantic relationships? There's this whole thing where if I got to tell you what I need,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Then you're not my person, right? And
Hmm.
there's this assumption that people can read minds or know what it is that your expectations entail. And that's actually a fallacy. So, do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, listen, I hate to admit, but I have been one of those people in relationships like, you should know this about me, right? And so what I hope the trust languages help do is close this expectation gap. The reason why trust tends to be eroded is because I had an expectation of you that you weren't even aware of. And
Exactly.
I'm side-eyeing you all day like, "Oh man, I can't believe they haven't done it." You know, and then they're thinking that we're cool because I'm smiling in all the Microsoft Teams meetings, right? So there's nothing wrong here. And so I think what happens is it's less of a trust issue for me, Vernay, but it's a communication crisis, right? We're
Yeah.
not communicating with each other. And I do believe that if even when the power dynamics or peer to peer, when people understand what good looks like to you, they more than likely, unless they're very sinister, could be like, oh, okay, now that I know that that's the expectation, more than likely I could start to work toward that, right? But you can't work
Yes.
toward improving a relationship that you didn't understand what the expectation was. And I think in our romantic relationships, we see the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. So here's a question where I'm thinking, okay, say you blew it, trust is lost. Um, for example, somebody said they were going to do something. You thought there was some clarity about it, and they fail.
Mm.
They don't do it. And it seems like they didn't try to do it. Okay. So you're now saying, look, I don't know if I can trust you because you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. And as a result, this is the impact. Often we don't really share the impact part. But how do you get in that person's good graces? In how long does it take? Like what how many things do you have to do? Because I know folks who are like, well, I've been trying, but it's no use. They're never going to trust me again. So what do you think about that particular type dynamic?
I think that's a real dynamic too, right? But I also think that part of it is we don't give people a chance to rebuild, right? So unless someone did something, egregious in the workplace, but certain things like feedback or they didn't follow through, we have to articulate that here and root it in fact, right? Not feeling, and show them the examples and then say, what do we got to do? But I think if you're the person who keeps eroding trust with your team or your peers, I think that's where you have to take a step back and say, okay, I know that acknowledgement is really important for this person, or I know that follow through is important for this person, and I need to go acknowledge that I have dropped the ball, right? And most of the time, we're all humans first and employees second. So we just want you to acknowledge the wrong, right? And make an effort to try to rectify that. And also, it goes back to being transparent. If you see that I'm falling short, don't feel bad for coming and reminding me. I'm not doing this intentionally, but I have a million things going on, but this I do care about. I think it's when we pretend that we're dropping the ball, but we're not, right? And that continuously erodes trust. And so I would encourage every person listening into our conversation is when you are tasked with a situation, ask yourself, is this decision going to enhance trust with someone or erode trust? And when we think about that decision, because the impact is either enhanced or eroded, right? Unintentionally or intentionally. And if we continuously do that, then we are going to see lack of productivity. We are going to see burnout in our employees. We are going to see those retention rates, people are going to leave. And so I think trust isn't just a nice thing to have and good for our relationships, but it's good for the bottom line. And I think if people care about the bottom line and profitability, you're going to have, like they say, happy wife, happy life, right? Happy employees, good for
Absolutely.
business.
So, and also this is where you talked about good intent, and this is where I would love for you to talk about the relationship between compassion and trust, both of them being essential, I think, to the workplace going as well as it possibly can for everybody, and ultimately, making workplace as productive and as successful as possible. So, how do those two big ideas come together?
Yeah, I think you can't. I think, we often talk about the future of work and we talk about it from a perspective of, AI and technology, but I also think we have to talk about it from human connection as well, right? And that's just as essential as, what your tech stack is. Okay. And so I'm glad that you hone in on that. And so we have to understand again that people are human first, employees second. And so when we don't have compassion, we all might work at the same place, but we don't experience that workplace the same. And so we have to also take the blinders off and say, okay, it may not be feasible for everybody to get back to the office on Monday. And I just told them 2 weeks ago, right? Let me find out what's going on. Let me have these conversations that we aren't having to find out, okay, we know that we said you can work from home for the last 2 years. We actually need people back in the office. And here's why. But if you're not able to do that in 5 days, let's work on something together so that maybe we start with 2 days, right? And we start building our way. And I think we just have to remember that our situation isn't necessarily the same as someone else's. And we need to get under the hood again and find out what they need and ask the right questions. And I do believe that we don't, it's not about being nice at work per se, it's about being compassionate, it's about being empathetic. And it's one of the reasons why I included sensitivity as being a trust language, because sometimes we say certain things and we might not have intended for it to harm someone, but had we been a little more sensitive to the cultural climate or what's taking place, we may not say that joke if they live in LA and I don't. right? So thinking
Exactly.
about those things, and again, I don't think anyone shows up to work saying, "How can I erode trust with my team?" But we do that in our actions, and in order for us to have the best workplaces possible, we're going to have compassion, and we're going to have trust. And when we make a mistake, we have to re-up on our trust, because trust is not just a one-time event, it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. I love that. And the whole human, like remembering that the person who you work with or you work for or you supervise is also a human, um, and has some of the same needs. It seems like we kind of caught that during COVID
Yes.
and then we let it go. And I mean, some people actually still like have breakthroughs and COVID during COVID that help them become better leaders. And some are just like, I'm so glad that's over. Now I don't have to be paying attention to
Right.
people's needs,
Hmm.
right? Because it is hard. It's not as easy, but ultimately, it's a longer term perspective about building the kind of belonging and the kind of respect and the kind of regard that actually ultimately results in better results and people, like you said, staying longer, feeling more loyalty, etc. And this is my question. Given all of the employers who were caught off guard, perhaps give them the benefit of the doubt, but who have backpedaled on diversity, equity, and inclusion based on the pressure they have felt from the administration, what impact do you think that has had on employees in the workplace? And where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, that is something that's probably keeping many of us up at night, right? Where do we go from here? And something that I just want to touch on that you said, Renee, was respect. And this is what trust and respect, they go hand in hand, and compassion. And again, it goes back to transparency. We understand the climate of the world right now, specifically the United States, and to pretend that there's nothing to see here, or pretend that what all the work that we've been doing over the last several years doesn't matter anymore, and now we, like a pop-up shop, we close up and move on to the next thing. How do you think that impacts the women that were in those programs, or people of color, or LGBTQ, or you know people with disabilities? How do you think all of that impacts them in their day-to-day work, right? And trust has taken a hit. But think about, if that situation, if we could go back in our DeLorean back to the future and say, okay, all these things were coming down, and we say, listen, hey, we understand that this isn't the route that we wanted to go, but this is where we are. But we're committed to making sure that women still have a place at this company, that African American people still have a place at this company, that, if you have a disability, we are committed to making sure that everyone has accessibility, right? That is still a core tenet of what we do. We might call it something different, but we are still committed to each and every person having a safe environment in our company. That
Yes.
changes the dynamics, and now you're like, "You know what? I'm ready to ride at dawn for my company." Right? but
Yes.
but when we say nothing, or we just close up shop, then that is, I'm like, "Wait, am I going to have a job here in a month?" Am I, and that's the thing. I want to hear your thoughts.
No, because I'm thinking also like about the impact of fear
Yeah.
and how fear causes people to be quiet and to cover and for protection for all sorts of reasons. But it cuts down on what we were just talking about, which is how essential it is to communicate to people, to actually share what you're thinking and how you're feeling. And so people are just sort of like hiding, and then this is where I do think that it is a leader's job because they are in the role of, they have power. You
Mhm.
cannot deny the power. Now, they also have leaders that they have to worry about, right? Who have power over them. But I think this is where courage comes in. So, of
Mhm.
course, I'm writing my book too. And I'm thinking, okay, these things are all interrelated
Mm-hmm.
because you may have a very good reason to be afraid. But if you don't bring the courage that is necessary to this moment, you're going to make it more difficult for people to trust you
Yep.
or to believe in you. So you're saying something on paper, and now you're pulling that away, and you're saying something in maybe your actions. But as you mentioned, actions are important. And so you're saying one thing over here, but you acting different over here, and people don't know what to make of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know, like you said, the expectation gap grows because there's a vacuum. And so I'm really advising companies to figure out how to do it. But between the lawyers, some of the lawyers, and the comms, some of the comms people, they've been directed to be quiet. And so it's really a difficult time.
It is. I mean, it goes back to courage. One definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. And I think that we can still have these conversations without burning the house down, right? There's a way in which we all have heard it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's back to the compassion piece. Compassion builds trust. If we say, "Hey, I know it's scary right now, but we're committed to each and every one of you. Stick it out with us. We'll figure this out together," right? That makes me feel a little bit more comfortable to lean back in and say my company cares about me, right? And I think that that is back to the human element of this. A year ago we were having a Juneteenth festival. Now we can't even say it. I'm saying, what do you think that signals to people in the workplace? And if you want people to do their best work, they have to be safe, and all the studies show that. And so if we do care about our bottom line, then we're going to have some of these conversations, and reset the clock, and talk to people in a way from a human element, because it can hit any of us at any time. But trust is one of those things that it's global, it's universal, and we all want it, whether you live in Tokyo or you live in North Dakota. Trust is important.
Exactly. And throughout all groups of people. And so the other thing that I think we may be doing now that maybe we didn't do it enough, which is to remind people this is for everyone. This is respect for everybody.
Mhm.
This is opportunity for everybody. This is feedback. This is trust that we're trying to build for everybody. Now, if you happen to be one of those people who don't want us to be respectful, and just to a certain group of people, that we won't be able to work with that, right? So there has to be some limitations, but I do think that maybe there wasn't enough communication to certain people that they're part of the whole idea of how to keep people healthy mentally, spiritually, physically, the accessibility, the respect and the understanding. That is for everybody. And I do know that sometimes people go too far when they get afraid. They just clamp down
Yeah.
completely on all sides of a
Mhm.
dynamic. And so I really wanted to hear your thoughts about this. And I want people to come and read this book. And so when does it come out? How do people get it? Where are you going to be? How do people hear more? I just want to make sure that everyone has access to what you've done here.
Well, thank you for the support and just for your mentorship, and being just such a good leader. I stand on your shoulders for the work that you have been doing. So thank you, for all that you do to make the workplace better, Vernā. But talk to me nice. The 7 trust languages for a better workplace. You can order it and get it, wherever you like to buy your books. It comes out July 22nd, and let's make trust great again in the workplace.
I love it. Should we get hats
Yes.
perhaps? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us and coming to Sundays with Renee. We are better off because of it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to follow me at Vernā Myers on Instagram and Twitter. You can also listen to my podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. Subscribe to my channel and share this episode with someone who is going to join us in this space. Make sure to visit my website for DEI resources and online learning courses at vernamyers.com, and make sure you sign up for my newsletter to stay in touch with me. Thank you again for listening, and see you next time for more Sundays with Vernā.